right, our next student to present to us is Thiago Noetzold, and he will be speaking on feeding strategies for broiler breeder hens. Now, Thiago is a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta. He's originally from Brazil, where he grew up on a broiler farm, and in the past 10 years has studied and worked with broiler breeders. So let's say hello to Thiago Noetzold.
Right. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here today. There you go. All right, so I'm gonna try to summarize around 2 years of work in 10 minutes. So if you have any extra questions or anything, just you can talk to me later. So this is basically a broiler breeder project. So for the egg farmers or broiler farmers, you might be interested in topic, but is really for the hatching egg industry. So basically, we know that the broiler breeders, so the parents of the broilers, they have a huge genetic potential. So if you feed them as broilers, they're probably gonna grow just as much as the broilers' growth. And overfeeding them can be common. So if you give them feed as much as they want to eat, they're gonna be overfed, and that usually can be a problem. And that's why we control body weight of broiler breeders. So for the producers, we have this control, and usually we follow the growth trajectories, all the targets that are provided from the companies, from the genetic companies that have those genetic lines. So one of the problems is that the feed restriction can also prevent this reproductive dysfunction that those birds can have. So if they grow too much, they're not going to have a best performance you can get out of them. But in addition to that, if you restrict them too much, lately you've been seeing that you also might be restricting their best performance. So when we look about 20, 30 years ago, you can see a very different growth of the follicles in the ovary when you compare to ad-lib bird in the bottom, and in the top you can see more of a restricted bird. And usually what you want to have, it's those larger yellow follicles there. You want to have around 6 to 7, maybe 8 of those higher than 10 millimeters. So that's going to give you 1 egg per day. And that's going to be the best what you can get out of those breeders. And you see in the bottom one, that's a lot, there's an overgrown ovary, and that you're going to have a lot of dysfunction. So double yolk, shellless eggs, those kind of things. And usually you don't want that. So, and besides, usually those birds, they would stop producing eggs a lot earlier than the fed restricted ones. But when we look more to nowadays production, you can see that this difference from an ad-lib bird compared to a restricted bird has decreased. So you can see the number of those follicles from the ad-lib bird has decreased, even though we full fed them. So that's one things we observed. And the other thing that we have seen is that when you look to late 70s, for example, the weight of around double as the weight of the progeny. And when you look to nowadays, that's 4 times as much. So the genetic really have increased their potential. And when you look at the growth trajectory of the female throughout their life, you can see that especially during the rearing phase, up to 20, 22 weeks of age, there's not a huge difference in this body weight. In the production cycle, they do have a difference in in body weight, but not as much as during their rearing phase. Additionally, we saw over the last 30 years also a decrease in carcass fat of those birds. So when you look about early 90s, you can see that's about 50% of this fat, and the total as a percentage of total fat decreased to up to nowadays. So that's basically bring us the question that those birds, their genetic potential has increased a lot, and maybe we should be thinking about relaxing their feed restriction a little bit, so increase their body weight. So basically with this project, so this part of our project was to see this different body weights, growth trajectories for the birds and see how was their fat deposition. So basically from what we've seen on the past literature, and also basically see their reproduction performance and also their chick production. So some of the methodology we use the Ross 308 strain, and we feed those birds. So to be able to feed them to a perfect target body weight, we use the precision feeding system, also developed at the University of Alberta. I'm going to show you about the system a little bit. I have a short video. You can have a look how those birds are in a free run pen with the machines. So we had for this specific trial right here, 12 growth trajectories, and I'm going to show you some details about those growth trajectories later. And we have 24 birds per curve. We also raised the males in the same system as well. And those birds, they were fed all the same diet. So diets were equal for all the birds. The difference was basically the growth trajectories. And not going to go into a lot of details about the diets. So basically how the precision feeding system works. You have basically, you saw a little bit in the video, but we have free run birds and we have two stages on the system. So the first stage is basically the one where we have birds going into, or we call the decision stage, where we collect the body weight of those birds. And basically those birds, they all receive radio frequency identification that goes in their wing. And we basically track every single bird. And once those birds enter to the decision stage, the body weight is collected in that stage. And based on the body weight, we feed that bird. The bird goes to the next stage to receive the meal. Otherwise, that bird is ejected from the decision. It has a chance to go again later on in the day. So usually birds receive about in this trial, 5 to 7 meals per day. So, and they have much more visits per day for each one. So once basically identify that bird, based on the growth trajectory that we assign the given bird, the bird is allowed to go to the next stage and receive a meal. So a little bit about the growth trajectories development. I'm not gonna go in a lot of detail on that, but we try to do it in a systematic way so we could actually optimize the body weight. So we could come up with certain recommendation for that. So in this trial, we have two main important things that we changed. So we changed the early growth of these birds. So we changed the phase of growth. So when you see a different you see the different parts here. You have different colors. We basically divided the growth of the birds in 3 different phases. So we have early, pubertal, and a post-pubertal. And our main objective was changing the early growth of those birds and also some of the pubertal growth. So the early growth was changed, and I'll show you the growth trajectory later. And also we have the pubertal growth spurt, which is kind of the peak of gain for the pubertal phase. We also shift that pubertal growth spurt of the birds. So just to line up the growth trajectories, so we have the breeder predicted. So this is basically the prediction from the model that we developed just to change those phases based on the raw 308 recommended body weight from the guidelines. And here we have the first 6 sets of growth trajectory. So you can see we have the 21, that would be the basically standard. So it's that blue line that's on top of the red line. And we have the pubertal growth spurt of 15 weeks. So that would be the top blue line. So it would be the heaviest birds. And we have the delayed one. So we have 2 curves under the recommended body weight target that are the 23 weeks of age. So those were the 6 sets, first 6 ones. And the second set was basically the same weeks of interval of pubertal growth spurt, but we did have an early growth phase. So that one, if you look at early ages, so from 0 to 10, 15 weeks of age, you can see that they start gaining their body weight early on in their life. And they basically overlap later with the blue. And the body weights come together again at around 40, 45 weeks of age. So going through the results. those are the body weights that we have for all the 12 growth trajectories over 59 weeks of age. And you can see that they follow the recommended body weight for that specific growth trajectory most of the time. There was a little bit of a dip around 30 weeks of age. And when we look at the carcass fat composition, so we saw that with the early growth, we did change a little bit of their carcass fat, but because later on they changed most of the pubertal growth phase, the early growth was not as important to change their fat carcass composition. So they did change their fat carcass composition over time, but the most important one was the pubertal phase. So we saw that with the pubertal growth, that was really what changed their carcass fat composition. And we saw that when you saw that higher body weights that I show in the growth trajectories, they also were able to deposit more fat when compared to the lower or to the more lighter birds in the growth trajectories that we had. And then when we look to the total egg productions up to 60 weeks of age, you can see that, again, with the early pubertal growth spurt, so you can see in the bottom here, those weeks, so the pubertal growth phase, those are the pubertal growth spurt in weeks, so that's not age, that's just the body growth trajectories. So the higher their body weight as the pubertal growth spurt was increased, basically we're able to increase the number of eggs they laid. And consequently, we also saw that they increased the number of chicks. So we estimated we have hatchings throughout our trial, and we estimated the number of chicks those birds would produce. And basically, we had greater chick production as we increased their body weight as well. So just some take-home messages from this trial. So I didn't show you abdominal fat, Pat, but it was basically similar to what the carcass fat composition was. So we did increase. And we saw that at the time of we photostimulate these birds, or around the time we photostimulate them, was one of the most important predictors for the reproductive output. And then advanced this time of pubertal growth spurt was basically we have the increase of fat and egg production and also chick production for these birds. And when we saw the early growth, so basically shifting that early growth on the birds started gaining more weight early on in their life, basically did not increase any of the production parameters such as egg and chicks, but it did increase feed conversion ratio. So it was not beneficial from that standpoint as well. So some of the practical recommendations, what does that actually mean for the industry? We would definitely recommend, based on those findings, that not a lot of changes on the targets prior to 7 to 8 weeks of age, and we recommend a higher targets from 7 to around 40 weeks of age, which was in this case you can see by the blue line, which that would be recommended compared to the standard from the genetic lines. Something that we might speculate as well is that after 40 weeks of age, we could actually keep their body weight even higher. We don't have to bring it back. So we would avoid or prevent some underfeeding of these birds, right? Because they are still gaining weight right there, even though we bring them back to the growth trajectory. But maybe to prevent underfeeding, we could keep those, instead of pulling that blue line back to the red one, we could just keep it higher. And in addition to that, we would avoid increasing growth early too much, because that would increase FCR, and we have some loss on that. Of course, you don't want to restrict them too much, so they can have a proper body development during the rearing pullet phase as well. But that would be recommended as well. And I just want to thank to all the partners and sponsors for this project. And yeah, well, thank you.
Okay, Slido is open. If you have any questions for our speaker, you'll go ahead. One just popped up. Look at that. Besides the weight and abdominal fat, were other variables measured and considered, like shank length or breast flushing?
Yes, we did measure shank length, breast flashing, and we did see increase in both of them. The early growth was the parameter that was most influential in shank length. So that really increased the shank length, but the pubertal increase of body weight also increased the shank length a little bit. So that shows that basically the early growth of those birds, you can really change their body frame. But in the pubertal phase or towards after 10, 12 weeks of age, you can increase their body size a little bit, not as much. They're going to deposit more fat on that, but you can influence that.
What about the economics? I guess if you don't have to feed them quite as much, maybe in the early phase, do you save a little on feed costs, or does that get kind of canceled out if you actually need to feed them a little more after the pubertal phase?
Yes, we did see feed consumption increase, and besides the egg and chick production. We haven't run the economics yet, but based on works done before from Mohammed Afrozia has done some work on that as well, and we saw that the number of chicks basically paid off the amount of feed that was increased. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, wow. Now they've all popped up. Okay. What is the ideal amount to increase the BW target from 7 to 40 weeks?
So it would be around 5% based on our trajectories here. I know some producers already do that, and they said they've had success on that. So it depends. You can maybe increase more than that. It's all about the optimal. You know, if you increase 10%, you might actually have even more eggs or chicks. But it's really you might have to see a couple of flocks and see if that actually pays off the amount of feed you actually are putting in on. But I would say at least 5% would be interesting to see.
And you only studied the one strain, and could there be variances from strain to strain too?
Yes, there could be some variance. We did see the other trial we had was with 708, and that was very similar results. So I would say the 308 and 708 as well. Maybe we're not sure, but we think that would be similar with the Cobb strain as well.
Okay. Do you see differences in egg weight and production? What about the fertility rates as well? So kind of two questions there. Any differences in egg weight and production, and what about fertility rates?
Yes, the egg weight, definitely you increase the egg weight because of the body weights, very tie related, both of them. One good thing is that usually you're going to have higher egg weights early on too, because you already have higher body weight. So you might be losing a little less of small eggs you're not sending to the hatchery. I think it's 52 grams in Alberta. So that's but towards the end you might end up having a little bit of a higher weight of eggs as well. We did see an increase in egg weight. It wasn't a huge difference, so I'm assuming that wouldn't be as much. And the fertility, we saw very similar fertility. Was a slightly higher increase in fertility for the higher body weights, and we might think that might be related to feather quality. The feather quality was a little better too, so those birds, they had more nutrients, and they had a little bit of a slightly better feather quality. So that could be a potential explanation for the result too.
And the number of chicks per hen increased. Was there any impact though on chick viability?
That would be, I think our next speaker probably could talk a little about that. But we did had some hatchings and that we raised the progeny. I think I'm not able to respond that, but you probably can ask her later.
Okay, and was the bird a 308 AP?
No, it was just 308.
Just 308. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the protein to energy levels in the feed being fed at this time?
I don't have it top of my head, but it was the updated recommendation from the Ross 308. So I can definitely get that. And if who asked that can ask me later again. I can give it to you.
Right. So if you ask that question, you can connect later. And then how do breeding companies process practical research like this, considering changes that pedigree birds won't be in the field for 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, so we do. So this was a project that Aviagen was involved like very closely, and so I think probably some of the results they are gonna recommend too, or at least they are aware to what change they might have to make for the next genetics they have. So usually any change they're gonna see now in 4 years. That's usually how many years it takes for the changes. But I think this project specific is very closely related with them. So we had a lot of people from Viagen involved. So I think that's going to be a very close applied very soon to the field. Yeah.
Okay, and then I think we answered this one, but we'll just reinforce it. Does the increase in production rate make up for the extra feed costs?
Yes, yes. I would say we haven't done the economic analysis yet, but based on our previous studies, yeah, that definitely paid off. Yeah.
And then which 308 was used? Would there be more of a concern with running higher body weights with the 308 AP?
Yes, I know the 308 AP is the one that they're starting to bring to Alberta, and it's been already used in a few years in South America. I would assume it's very similar. Not the bird itself, but I would assume they might increasing body weight would definitely benefit from that. I mean, on a farm, we always have to consider it from a research perspective, right? But thinking of all birds, small birds, you might bring with a higher body weight as well, and you can definitely increase the production of that. And again, that just comes down to if you actually are gonna pay off amount of feed you're using. But most of the time, because of the chick that is extra produced, if you can get the extra chicks, that definitely would pay.